I used to believe my wife, Amanda, was just really dedicated to her job. She worked in marketing, and her schedule had always been demanding: late nights, client meetings, and, of course, the business trips. I never questioned it. If anything, I was proud of her. I thought I had a hard-working, ambitious wife, and I wanted to be the supportive husband who never doubted her. But looking back, I should have seen the signs. The first crack in the illusion came a few months ago when Amanda started acting different. It wasn't anything obvious at first. Just little things that, on their own, wouldn't have meant much. She'd get defensive whenever I asked about her schedule. Her phone, which used to sit openly on the counter or the coffee table, was suddenly always face down. She started dressing up more, even on days when she worked from home. Then there was the perfume. Amanda had always worn a specific kind, light, floral, nothing too strong. But one day, she came home from one of her weekend work trips smelling different. It was a heavier scent, musky, the kind I knew she didn't like. I made a joke about it. Something along the lines of, "Trying out a new perfume?" She barely reacted. Just muttered something about a coworker spilling some on her at dinner. It was a small lie, a weird one, but I let it go. Then came the bigger changes. She was always glued to her phone, but not in the way she used to be. She wasn't just scrolling anymore. She was hiding it, turning away when I walked by, setting it down the second I entered the room. One time, I caught her smiling at her screen, and when she noticed me watching, she locked it so fast you'd think I had just caught her committing a crime. I laughed it off at first, but deep down, a sick feeling started creeping in. Then there were the trips. They became more frequent. Suddenly, she had to travel at least twice a month. They were always last minute and urgent, as if her entire company would collapse if she didn't hop on a plane immediately. She was never willing to FaceTime when she was away, always blaming bad hotel Wi-Fi or late-night meetings. I told myself I was overthinking it, that I was being paranoid. But then the mistake happened. One night, after one of her trips, Amanda came home exhausted and went straight to bed. Her phone was still in her purse, and for the first time in months, she forgot to take it with her. I don't know what possessed me to do it. Maybe it was the months of suspicion bubbling up. Maybe it was just gut instinct. I reached for her phone, and that's when everything started falling apart. My hands were shaking as I pulled Amanda's phone from her purse. I knew I was crossing a line, but something inside me screamed that I had to look. I tried her usual passcode first, our anniversary. It didn't work. My stomach tightened. She had changed it. That was enough to make me feel sick. We had always been open with our phones. She used to borrow mine all the time, and I had hers saved on muscle memory. When had she changed it? Why hadn't she told me? I stared at the screen, debating whether to put it back before she noticed. But then, almost as if the universe wanted me to find the truth, a message popped up on her lock screen. "Can't wait for next time, beautiful. Last night was perfect." I felt like the air had been punched out of my lungs. The message was from a number with no name, just a random string of digits. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. I read the words over and over, hoping that somehow they would change, that maybe I was misreading, that maybe it was a misunderstanding. But there was no misinterpreting that. Last night, perfect. Amanda had been on a business trip the night before, and now I had proof that she wasn't exactly focused on marketing strategies. I gripped the phone so hard my fingers ached. Every part of me wanted to unlock it, to go deeper, to see the full conversation. But without the passcode, I was stuck. My mind raced through possibilities. Should I wake her up? Demand answers right then and there? Should I call the number? Instead, I did something I never thought I'd have to do. I grabbed my own phone and wrote the number down. Then, as quietly as I could, I put Amanda's phone back in her purse exactly how I found it. My hands were still shaking when I left the room. I needed air. I needed to think. I stepped outside onto the porch, breathing in the cold night air, trying to calm the storm raging in my chest. My wife was cheating on me, and I had no idea how to even process it. The betrayal felt like a knife twisting in my gut. I thought about all the times she told me she loved me, all the nights she came home exhausted from her trips, falling asleep beside me like everything was normal. How long had this been going on? Who was this guy? And most importantly, what was I going to do next? I barely slept that night. My mind kept replaying the message over and over, my thoughts racing between disbelief, rage, and heartbreak. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Amanda lying next to me, peacefully asleep, as if she hadn't just come back from another man's bed. I kept staring at the number I had written down. I wanted answers, but I had no idea how to get them without tipping her off. I could call it, but what if he didn't answer? What if he recognized my voice? What if Amanda woke up and caught me? At some point, I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, I heard Amanda moving around in the bedroom. I stayed still, pretending to be asleep, listening to her go through her morning routine. She hummed to herself as she got dressed. She sounded happy, relaxed. Meanwhile, I was lying there, suffocating under the weight of what I knew. She kissed me on the cheek before leaving for work. That nearly made me snap. I almost sat up and confronted her right then and there. But something stopped me. Maybe it was instinct, maybe it was the need for more evidence, I don't know. Instead, I waited until I heard the front door close. Then I grabbed my phone and called the number. It rang twice before a man answered. "Hey babe," he said casually. "Miss me already?" I felt my entire body go ice cold. I didn't say anything. Couldn't. I just sat there, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. "Babe?" he said again, sounding a little confused now. I hung up. My head was spinning. I needed a second to breathe, but at the same time, I felt like I couldn't breathe at all. Hearing that guy's voice, the way he spoke so casually, so confidently, like he had no idea he had just answered a call from her husband. It made everything feel real in a way that it hadn't before. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. This wasn't just paranoia. This was happening. I couldn't sit still anymore. I needed to see it for myself. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I went to Amanda's work. I told myself I was just dropping by to surprise her. But deep down, I knew that was a lie. I wasn't there for lunch. I was there to see how she acted, to watch her, to find out if she looked me in the eyes and pretended like everything was fine. When I walked into the office, her coworker at the front desk smiled at me. "Hey, aren't you Amanda's husband?" she said. "Yeah." I forced myself to smile back. Thought I'd take her out to lunch. Her expression shifted, just slightly. It was quick. So quick I almost missed it. But I didn't. "Oh," she said, glancing down at her desk. She's actually not here today." My stomach dropped. "Not here," I repeated. "Yeah, she's out on a client meeting. Left about an hour ago." I knew she was lying. I could see it in her face. She wouldn't look me in the eye. She was fidgeting. But I played along. I forced another smile. "Gotcha. No worries. I'll just call her later." I turned and walked out of there, my entire body buzzing with adrenaline. Amanda had left for work that morning. I watched her go. So if she wasn't actually at work, then where the hell was she? I already knew the answer. I got in my car, gripping the wheel so tightly my fingers ached. I had a choice to make. I could go home, pretend like I didn't know anything, and wait for her to feed me another lie when she got back. Or I could find out exactly where she was. I checked my phone. I still had access to our shared location tracking from when we used to use it for safety reasons. My hands were shaking as I pulled it up. Amanda's location was pinging from a hotel downtown. I felt my blood go hot. I started the car, and I drove. I don't even remember the drive. I must have been running on pure adrenaline because one moment, I was pulling out of the office parking lot, and the next, I was parked outside a hotel downtown, staring at the entrance like it was the gateway to hell. The hotel was one of those sleek, business-class ones, nice but not too fancy. The kind of place where people checked in for overnight work trips or quick meetups that nobody was supposed to know about. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my fingers hurt. My stomach was twisting in knots, my mind racing through every possibility. Maybe there's an explanation. Maybe this is work-related. Maybe I'm overreacting. But I knew I wasn't. I had seen the message. I had heard that man's voice. And now, Amanda was in a hotel in the middle of the day when she was supposed to be at work. I checked her location again, hoping, praying, that maybe it had been a mistake. It hadn't. She was still there. I had two choices. I could turn around, go home, and pretend I never saw any of this. Or I could go inside and finally rip this lie apart at the seams. I got out of the car. The lobby was quiet, the kind of calm you only find in places designed for discretion. A bored-looking receptionist barely glanced at me as I walked in. I had no plan, no idea what I was even going to say or do, but my feet kept moving, carrying me straight toward the elevators. I was shaking, not from fear, no, this was something else. A mix of rage, betrayal, and something deeper, something that made me feel hollow inside. I checked my phone one last time before stepping inside. Her location hadn't moved. She was still here. I pressed the button for the 5th floor. The ride up felt like it took forever. My heartbeat was so loud I could hear it in my ears. I tried to take a deep breath, but it was like there wasn't enough air in the elevator. Then the doors slid open. I stepped out into the hallway, scanning the numbers on the doors. The closer I got to the one I knew she was behind, the more I felt like my entire world was closing in. Then I stopped. Room 514. This was it. I stood there for a second, staring at the door. My hands were clenched so tightly into fists that my nails were digging into my palms. I wanted to kick the door in. I wanted to make a scene to force her to face me. But I didn't. Instead, I raised my hand and knocked. A few seconds of silence. Then movement. I heard footsteps, the sound of the door unlocking. And then it opened. Amanda stood there, wrapped in a hotel robe, her hair still damp, her eyes widening in shock the second she saw me. I will never forget the look on her face. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't even fear. It was annoyance. As if I was the one intruding. As if I had just ruined her day. Behind her I heard movement. A man's voice. The same voice from the phone call. And just like that, the last shred of doubt disappeared. I knew. She knew I knew. And in that moment, everything changed. Time slowed down. Amanda stood there, staring at me like I was some kind of inconvenience instead of her husband who had just caught her sneaking around in a hotel room. Her eyes flicked behind her for a split second. Barely noticeable, but I caught it. She wasn't just surprised to see me. She was calculating, thinking, trying to figure out how she was going to spin this. Behind her, I heard the rustling of sheets. Then the voice. "Who is it, babe? Babe." That single word ignited something in me. I had heard him say it on the phone, but hearing it again in person in this context, it felt like fuel being poured onto an already raging fire. Amanda reacted instantly. She turned her head slightly, just enough to respond without fully moving away from the door. "It's no one," she snapped. "No one." I was standing there, her husband, the man she had built a life with, the person who had been faithful to her for years, and she had the audacity to call me no one. My fists clenched so tight my nails dug into my palms. My heart was hammering against my ribs. My breathing was heavy, but I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me lose control. I wasn't going to let her turn this around on me. I forced my voice to stay calm. "So this is what business trips look like now?" Amanda scoffed, rolling her eyes like I was the problem in this situation. "Oh my God. Don't be dramatic." Dramatic. I wanted to laugh. I really did. Before I could respond, the door behind her opened wider, and that's when I saw him. Tall, dark-haired, smug. He was standing there in nothing but a towel, his hair damp, looking at me with the kind of arrogance that made me want to knock him straight to the floor. And the worst part? He didn't even look guilty. If anything, he looked amused, like this was some kind of joke. I didn't say anything. I just stared at him, then at Amanda, waiting for someone to speak. She sighed, like she was already exhausted by this whole situation. "What are you even doing here?" she asked, crossing her arms, like I was the one who owed her an explanation. I ignored the question. "How long?" I asked instead. She blinked. "How long what?" I exhaled sharply, barely keeping myself together. "Don't play dumb, Amanda. How long have you been sneaking off to hotels with him?" She scoffed, But I saw it, that tiny hesitation. That brief flicker of panic before she schooled her expression. Then she lied. "You're insane," she spat, shaking her head. "This is just a work thing. You're acting like some crazy jealous husband." "A work thing?" I cut her off. "Yeah? And what exactly do you do in your work meetings that requires a hotel room, a robe, and him walking around half-naked?" She bristled. "I don't have to explain myself to you." The arrogance in her voice, the complete lack of remorse, made my blood boil. This wasn't just betrayal, this was disrespect. The guy, still standing there in his towel like he owned the place, finally spoke. "Dude, I think you should leave." Dude, that was it. That was the moment I lost every ounce of restraint I had left. I took a step forward. My jaw clenched so hard it hurt. "You think I should leave?" My voice was dangerously low, filled with an anger I could barely contain. Amanda must have sensed that I was 1 second away from doing something I'd regret, because she suddenly moved between us, holding up a hand like I was the one causing the scene. "You're embarrassing yourself," she muttered. Embarrassing myself. I had walked into a hotel room and found my wife with another man, and I was the one embarrassing myself? I took a deep breath, forcing myself to step back. I wasn't going to let her get to me. I looked her dead in the eyes and said, "I'm done." And then, without waiting for another word, I turned around and walked away. Amanda didn't follow me. She didn't call my name. She didn't beg for forgiveness. She just let me leave. And that silence told me everything I needed to know. I don't remember walking back to my car. 1 second I was in that hotel hallway, leaving behind my wife and the guy she'd been sneaking around with, and the next, I was gripping the steering wheel so hard my hands ached. I didn't start the engine right away. I just sat there, staring out the windshield, my mind completely blank. I thought I'd be furious. I thought I'd be shaking with rage. But all I felt was empty, like someone had scooped out my insides and left me with nothing but a hollow shell. I had just caught my wife cheating, confronted her, walked away, and she hadn't even tried to stop me. That part stung the most. She didn't chase after me. She didn't beg. She didn't even pretend to be sorry. She had just stood there, arms crossed, like I was inconveniencing her by showing up and exposing the truth. I took a deep breath, gripping the wheel tighter. I needed to clear my head, think, process. But how the hell was I supposed to process this? Everything we had built together, years of marriage, trust, late-night talks, vacations, inside jokes, it had all been a lie, or at least it felt like one now. Because how do you love someone and betray them like that? How do you stand in front of your spouse, caught red-handed, and still act like they're the problem? I finally started the car, but I didn't drive home. Couldn't. Not yet. The thought of walking into our house, seeing her things, knowing that everything in there was tied to someone who had been lying to me for God knows how long. It was too much. So instead, I drove aimlessly. At some point, I ended up in a parking lot. A grocery store, maybe. I wasn't even sure. My phone buzzed, snapping me out of my daze. For a split second, I thought maybe it's her. Maybe now that the dust had settled, she'd realized what she'd done. Maybe she'd texted, called, something. I looked down. It wasn't Amanda. It was my best friend, Mark. I hesitated before answering. The second I did, his voice came through, full of confusion. "Dude, where the hell are you? You okay?" I must have sounded off when I picked up. Or maybe I had texted him something earlier and forgotten. I swallowed, trying to keep my voice steady. But I couldn't finish. Because how do you say something like this out loud? How do you just admit that your wife has been cheating and that you caught her in a damn hotel room in the middle of the day? Mark was quiet for a second. Then, in a softer voice, he asked, "Did something happen?" That was when it hit me. Something had happened. Something that was going to change everything. I wasn't just dealing with some fight or misunderstanding. This wasn't something a conversation or an apology could fix. My marriage was over, and I wasn't ready for that. I exhaled, staring at the dashboard. "Yeah," I finally said. My voice sounded foreign to me, like it belonged to someone else. Something happened. Mark didn't push. "Where are you?" I glanced around. I don't even know. Some parking lot. There was a pause. Then, stay there. I'm coming. I didn't argue. Didn't tell him not to. Because honestly, I didn't want to be alone. I hung up and leaned back against the seat, closing my eyes. The weight of everything came crashing down all at once. The betrayal, the humiliation, the cold, hard truth that my wife had checked out of our marriage long before I ever realized it. And now I had to figure out what the hell I was going to do next. I sat in that parking lot, staring at nothing, waiting for Mark to show up. My mind was a mess. 1 second, I was furious, my hands gripping the steering wheel like I wanted to crush it. The next, I felt completely numb, like none of this was real, like I was watching someone else's life fall apart from a distance. I kept replaying the moment in my head. The hotel door swinging open. Amanda standing there in a robe. The smug guy behind her, completely unbothered. And the way she had looked at me, not with guilt, not even with regret, just annoyance, like I had interrupted something important. It made me sick. A tap on my window snapped me out of it. I turned my head. Mark was standing outside my car, concern written all over his face. I unlocked the door, and he slid into the passenger seat without saying a word. He didn't ask any questions, didn't push. He just sat there waiting. That's the thing about old friends. They know when to talk and when to just be there. For a while, neither of us said anything. Then, finally, I exhaled and said the words out loud for the first time. Amanda's cheating on me. Saying it made it real. Mark didn't react right away. He just sat there, absorbing it. Then, slowly, he shook his head. That Amanda? Your wife. Like maybe I had meant some other Amanda. I let out a bitter laugh. Yeah, that Amanda. He ran a hand through his hair. How do you know? I gave him the short version. The weird behavior, the late-night phone habits, the sketchy business trips. Then, finally, the hotel. Mark's expression darkened with every word. By the time I finished, his hands were clenched into fists. You're telling me she didn't even try to explain herself? Not really, I muttered. She just acted like I was the problem. Mark let out a low whistle. Wow, that's next-level garbage behavior. I nodded. Yeah. Silence settled between us again. Finally, Mark sighed. So what now? That was the question, wasn't it? What now? I had spent the past few hours caught up in the shock of it all. The betrayal. The anger. But now I had to face reality. I could go home and pretend like this never happened. Pretend like I didn't know what I knew. Let Amanda gaslight me into believing it was my fault somehow. Or I could walk away. Burn it all down and start over. I swallowed hard. I think I need to end it. Mark nodded slowly, like he had already known the answer before I did. Good, he said. You deserve better, man. I exhaled, leaning my head against the steering wheel. I don't even know where to start. Mark clapped a hand on my shoulder. One step at a time. But first, you're not going back to that house tonight. I looked at him. I can't just disappear. Why not? He raised an eyebrow. She disappeared on you plenty of times, didn't she? He wasn't wrong. The thought of going home, seeing her, having to look at her after everything, it made my skin crawl. Come crash at my place, Mark said. Figure things out in the morning. I hesitated for a second, but then I nodded. Yeah. I wasn't going home tonight. Amanda could have the house for now. She could sit in the silence and wonder where I was for a change. I started the engine, the decision settling in my chest like a weight being lifted. I was done being the fool in this story. And tomorrow I'd start taking my life back. Mark's place was a small apartment downtown, nothing fancy, but it felt like a fortress compared to my house. A house that, until now, had been ours. A place I thought was built on love, trust, and all the other things I had been too naive to question. I dropped onto his couch, exhausted in a way I had never felt before. My whole body was drained, like my emotions had physically worn me out. Mark tossed me a blanket, then sat in the recliner across from me, cracking open a beer. He didn't say anything at first, just let me sit there in silence. I appreciated that, because honestly, I didn't know what to say. I kept staring at my phone, half expecting Amanda to call or text, to finally acknowledge what had happened. Maybe even attempt some weak excuse. But the screen stayed dark, and with every passing minute, the reality set in deeper. She didn't care. Not enough to fight for this. Not enough to even pretend she felt guilty. That stung more than anything. Mark took a sip of his beer before finally breaking the silence. You tell anyone else yet? I shook my head. Not yet. Are you going to? I exhaled, rubbing my temples. I don't know. Feels like once I tell people it's official. Like there's no coming back from it. Mark scoffed. Dude, there is no coming back from this. You caught her. It's over. I swallowed hard. Yeah. The words tasted bitter in my mouth, but I knew he was right. Still, I wasn't ready to deal with the fallout. The questions. The sympathy. The unsolicited advice. I wasn't ready for the phone calls from family members asking what happened or for mutual friends to pick sides. Most of all, I wasn't ready for Amanda's version of the story, because knowing her, she'd twist it. Make me look like the bad guy. Maybe say I was controlling or paranoid, or that I had emotionally checked out first. Some nonsense to justify what she did. And the worst part? Some people would believe her. I clenched my jaw. I just need time to think. Mark nodded. Fair enough. But you should at least talk to a lawyer. That made my stomach tighten. A lawyer. That made it sound so final. Mark must have noticed my hesitation because he leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Look, I know this sucks, but you gotta be smart about this. You don't know what she's gonna pull. Maybe she tries to take the house, drain your accounts. Who knows? You need to protect yourself. I sighed. He wasn't wrong. Amanda might have acted indifferent back at the hotel, but that didn't mean she'd roll over and play nice when it came to a divorce. And if she had the audacity to cheat, lie, and gaslight me, she was capable of worse. I'll call someone tomorrow, I muttered. Good. Mark sat back satisfied. In the meantime, you crashing here as long as you need. I managed a weak smile. Thanks, man. No problem. Just don't eat all my cereal. That actually made me chuckle, the first real laugh I had let out all day. It was small, but it was something. The reality of my situation still sat heavy in my chest. But at least now I had a plan. Step 1. Stay away from Amanda. Step 2. Get legal advice. Step 3. Figure out how to start over. I didn't know what my future looked like, but one thing was clear. Amanda wasn't going to be in it. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, my mind replayed the hotel scene over and over again. Like some twisted loop I couldn't escape. Amanda's blank stare. The smug look on that guy's face. The way she had dismissed me like I was just some inconvenience instead of her husband. I must have checked my phone 100 times, waiting for something, anything, from her. A text, a call, some pathetic excuse trying to smooth things over. But there was nothing. And that silence, that hurt more than I expected. When morning came, I felt like I had been hit by a truck. My body was exhausted, my brain fried, but I knew I couldn't just sit around and wallow. I needed to do something. So I got up, took a shower, and borrowed a hoodie from Mark since I hadn't even grabbed clothes from the house. As I was drinking my first coffee of the day, Mark sat across from me, scrolling on his phone. You should probably check the bank accounts, he said, not looking up. That hit me like a slap. I hadn't even thought of that. Amanda had full access to everything, our savings, our checking accounts, even the credit cards. And if she was as heartless as she had acted yesterday, there was no telling what she might do. I grabbed my phone and pulled up the banking app, my heart pounding. The balance popped up, and I let out a slow breath. Everything was still there. No surprise withdrawals, no sudden transfers. For now. But I wasn't going to take any chances. I needed to protect myself, just like Mark had said. The next few hours were spent making calls. First to the bank, freezing our joint credit cards so she couldn't run up any surprise charges. Then to a lawyer's office, setting up an appointment for later in the week. Just saying the words out loud, I need to discuss filing for divorce. Made my stomach turn. This was really happening. By the time I was done, I felt drained all over again. Mark, sensing that I needed a distraction, suggested we grab lunch. I agreed, mostly because I knew if I stayed in that apartment any longer, I'd go crazy. We ended up at a diner not too far from his place, one of those small, old-school spots with checkered floors and booths that had probably been there since the 80s. I wasn't really hungry, but I forced myself to eat anyway. Halfway through the meal, Mark suddenly put his fork down and leaned forward. "So, what are you gonna do about the house?" I sighed, rubbing my temples. "I don't know yet. You planning on going back?" The thought of walking through that front door, seeing Amanda, pretending like things were normal, it made me want to throw up. "No," I admitted. "Not yet. Maybe not ever." Mark nodded, taking a sip of his drink. "Might be a good idea to get some of your stuff, though. At least the important things." He was right. My clothes, my laptop, my documents, those were all still in the house. But the idea of facing Amanda again, even for 5 minutes, felt unbearable. Then, as if the universe had been listening in on our conversation, my phone buzzed. I glanced down. It was a text. From Amanda. "We need to talk." I stared at the screen, my pulse kicking up. The first message from her since everything had blown up. No apology. No explanation. Just those 4 words. I showed Mark the message. He raised an eyebrow. "You gonna answer?" I hesitated. Every instinct in me told me to ignore it. She didn't deserve my time. Not after everything. But at the same time, part of me wanted to hear what she had to say. I took a deep breath, then typed out a reply. "About what?" A few seconds later, she responded. "Come home and we'll talk." I exhaled sharply. Of course. She wanted me to come to her, on her terms, like she still had some kind of control over the situation. Mark scoffed when he read it. "Yeah, that's a trap." He wasn't wrong. But I needed closure. I needed to see what she had to say, if only to remind myself why walking away was the right decision. I texted back. "I'll come by later to grab my stuff." That's it. No response. Fine. Let her sit with that. I finished my meal, but the food felt like cardboard in my mouth. Because no matter how much I tried to act like I was moving forward, one thing was certain. Going back to that house, even just to grab my things, that was going to be a fight. I waited until the afternoon before heading to the house. Not because I was nervous, at least that's what I told myself, but because I needed time to mentally prepare for whatever Amanda was going to throw at me. Mark offered to come with me, but I turned him down. This was something I had to face alone. Besides, the last thing I needed was for things to get heated if Amanda started her usual manipulation tactics. As I drove toward what used to be our home, my hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. Everything about this felt wrong. A week ago, this was just my normal route home, a mindless drive I had done 1,000 times. Now, it felt like I was heading straight into enemy territory. I pulled into the driveway, and for a second, I just sat there, staring at the front door. My stomach twisted, and that hollow feeling returned, the same one I had felt in the hotel parking lot. I finally forced myself out of the car, walking up the path with heavy steps. I didn't knock. I still had my key, and I wasn't going to give Amanda the satisfaction of making this feel like her house. The second I stepped inside, I knew she had been waiting for me. She was sitting on the couch, legs crossed, scrolling through her phone like she wasn't the reason my life had just imploded. She didn't look up right away, just let out a dramatic sigh, locked her screen, and finally met my eyes. "You took your time," she said, as if I had kept her waiting. I ignored that. I wasn't here to argue. I was here to grab my stuff and get out. Without a word, I walked past her and headed for the bedroom. I could hear her get up and follow me, her bare feet padding against the floor. I expected her to start in with the fake apologies, maybe even a few pathetic excuses. But instead, her voice was cold when she finally spoke. "So that's it? You're just running away?" I let out a short, bitter laugh as I yanked my duffel bag from the closet. Running away? That was rich, coming from her. I started shoving my clothes into the bag, not bothering to fold anything. I just wanted to be out of there as fast as possible. But Amanda wasn't done. "You're really going to throw everything away over one mistake?" she pressed. That stopped me cold. I turned to face her, barely able to contain the anger bubbling up inside me. One mistake. One? She must have seen the look on my face because she rolled her eyes, crossing her arms like she was the one who had been wronged. "Oh, don't act like you're so perfect," she snapped. "Like you've never messed up in this marriage." I stared at her, genuinely stunned at the audacity. I had been nothing but loyal to her. I had supported her, trusted her, believed in her. And now, she was standing here, acting like I was somehow responsible for her cheating? I turned back to packing, refusing to take the bait. But she kept pushing. "I mean, honestly," she scoffed, "you haven't exactly been the most exciting husband. You're predictable, you never try new things, and let's be real. You stopped making me feel wanted a long time ago." There it was. The real reason she wanted me here. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't trying to fix anything. She just wanted to dump all of this on me, to make herself feel better about what she did. I zipped up my bag and slung it over my shoulder. I wasn't going to waste another second on this conversation. Amanda let out another sigh, like she was so exhausted by all of this. "You're being dramatic," she muttered. I stopped in the doorway, turning to face her one last time. "You know what's funny?" I said, my voice eerily calm. "I came here expecting you to lie, to make excuses, maybe even pretend to be sorry." I shook my head, a bitter smile tugging at my lips. "But this is worse. You don't even care. And that makes leaving so much easier." For the first time, her confident mask cracked. I saw it in her eyes, that flicker of uncertainty, of realization that she had pushed too far. But I didn't stick around to hear whatever nonsense she was about to spit out next. I turned and walked out, slamming the door behind me. And just like that, I was free. I sat in my car for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, letting everything sink in. The weight on my chest wasn't as heavy as before. It was still there, pressing down, but something had shifted. The second I walked out of that house, I really knew, that I was never going back. Amanda had made it easy for me. If she had begged, cried, even tried to spin some half-hearted excuse, maybe some part of me would have felt torn. Maybe I would have doubted myself, wondered if I was making the right decision. But she hadn't. She didn't apologize. She didn't take responsibility. She didn't even seem bothered. Instead, she had tried to make me feel guilty, as if her cheating was somehow my fault. And that was all I needed to walk away without looking back. I started the engine and pulled out of the driveway, not bothering to check if she was watching from the window. It didn't matter. She wasn't my problem anymore. As I drove, my phone buzzed on the passenger seat. For a second, I thought it might be Amanda, finally realizing that she had destroyed everything. But when I glanced at the screen, I saw Mark's name instead. I answered on speaker. "Yeah. You good?" I let out a breath. "I don't know. I think so. You get your stuff?" "Yeah." "And Amanda?" I laughed dryly. She tried to gaslight me, acted like I was overreacting, told me I was boring and predictable. Mark let out a low whistle. "Man, she's a piece of work." "Yeah," I muttered. "She really is." There was a pause before he spoke again, his voice quieter this time. "So what now?" I hadn't let myself think that far ahead. The past 24 hours had been nothing but shock, anger, and damage control. Now that it was over, now that I had officially walked away, I had no clue what came next. I sighed, shaking my head. "I have no idea." "Well," Mark said, "you're not going back to that house, right?" "Not a chance." "Good. Then first things first, you crash at my place until you figure things out. No rush." I appreciated that. Having at least one solid thing in my life right now helped. "Thanks, man. Don't mention it. But, I'm just gonna say it now. You're gonna need more than 2 pairs of jeans and a duffel bag of clothes if you're starting over." I smirked despite everything. "I'll figure it out." The call ended, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I turned onto the highway without a destination. I had no plan, no idea what my future looked like. But for the first time in a long time, I felt something that had been missing. Freedom. The first few days after walking out felt like a blur. I was staying at Mark's place, but I wasn't living, just existing. Waking up, drinking coffee, scrolling mindlessly through my phone, trying to figure out what my next move was. Amanda hadn't tried to contact me since that last text. No calls, no messages, nothing. And that silence? It should have made things easier. But instead, it felt like the final nail in the coffin of our marriage. She wasn't fighting for me. She wasn't even pretending to care. It made me wonder how long she had truly been done with our relationship, how long she had been keeping up appearances while I was still blindly believing we were happy. The thought made me sick. On the third day, I forced myself to get up and do something productive. I had a meeting with the lawyer in the afternoon, but first I needed to take care of something else. My name was still on the house, and I wanted it off. I drove to the bank, hands tight on the steering wheel. The place was nearly empty when I walked in, just a few employees and an older couple sitting with a teller. I went up to the counter, trying to ignore the tightness in my chest. The woman behind the desk greeted me with a polite smile. "How can I help you today?" I took a breath. "I need to remove my name from a joint account." Her expression shifted slightly, but she nodded. "Of course. Do you have your ID?" I handed it over, along with the debit card linked to the account Amanda and I had shared. The account that, for years, had been a symbol of us. The woman clicked away at her keyboard, then frowned. "It looks like you and your spouse both need to be present to make that change." I clenched my jaw. Of course, nothing was ever that simple. "Is there another way?" I asked. "You could close the account completely, but again, both parties need to be here to authorize it." I let out a slow breath, nodding. "All right, thanks." As I walked out of the bank, frustration boiled in my chest. That meant I had to talk to Amanda, arrange a meeting, sit across from her like we were business partners negotiating a deal instead of a broken couple with nothing left to say. I got back in my car and stared at my phone, debating whether to text or call. Every part of me wanted to avoid this, but I couldn't leave my name attached to something she had access to. I had no idea what she was capable of, and I wasn't about to find out the hard way. I texted her. "We need to close the joint account. Bank says we both have to be there." A few minutes passed. Then, finally, she responded. "Fine. When?" No argument. No snarky comments. Just straight to business. "Tomorrow at noon. See you then." That was it. No small talk. No attempt at a real conversation. And honestly, that was fine by me. I put my phone down, staring out the windshield. One more loose end to tie up. And then I could finally be done with Amanda for good. The next day, I drove to the bank early, not because I was eager to see Amanda, but because I wanted to be in and out as fast as possible. I wasn't here to argue. I wasn't here for closure. This was just paperwork. One more step toward wiping her out of my life completely. When I pulled into the parking lot, I saw her car already there. That surprised me. Amanda had never been the type to show up early for anything, let alone something that wasn't convenient for her. I took a deep breath and stepped out, mentally preparing myself for whatever attitude she was about to throw my way. She was waiting inside, sitting in one of the chairs near the front. She looked up when I walked in, but her expression was unreadable. No anger, no guilt, just cold indifference. She was dressed nice, too. Too nice for a bank visit. Hair curled, nails freshly done, makeup perfect. Like she wanted to prove something. I didn't say anything, just nodded and walked straight to the counter. She followed, staying a step behind, like she wanted me to take the lead. The same woman from yesterday greeted us with a polite smile. "Back again." "Yeah," I said. "Here to close the account." She nodded and started pulling up the details. Amanda finally spoke for the first time, her voice casual, like we were two strangers handling a minor inconvenience. "I assume you're moving your money somewhere else?" she asked. I didn't even look at her. "Yep." She hummed like she was thinking something over, but I didn't care enough to ask what. The banker slid some forms toward us. "You'll both need to sign here and here." I picked up the pen and signed without hesitation. Amanda, on the other hand, took her time, flipped through the pages like she was reviewing a $1 million contract. Finally, she signed. The banker took the papers, gave us a confirmation slip, and that was it. The account was closed. The last financial tie between us was officially gone. Amanda stood up first. "Well," she said, adjusting her bag on her shoulder. "That was easy." I didn't respond. I didn't owe her anything. She lingered, though, like she wanted me to say something. Maybe acknowledge her, maybe ask why she had done it, maybe even try to fix things. But I had nothing left to say. She exhaled, almost disappointed, then muttered, "See you around." I watched her walk out, her heels clicking against the tile. I stayed behind for a moment, letting her go, letting everything go. And for the first time in days I felt lighter. Because now I wasn't just planning to move on. I actually was. I didn't go straight back to Mark's place after leaving the bank. Instead, I drove around aimlessly, letting my mind catch up with everything that had just happened. The account was closed. That was it. One of the last official ties binding me to Amanda was gone. But why didn't I feel more relieved? I had expected to walk out of there feeling some grand sense of freedom, like a weight had finally been lifted. Instead, there was just emptiness, a quiet kind of numbness that I couldn't shake. Maybe it was because, despite everything, despite the betrayal, the lying, the absolute disrespect, there had still been a time when I loved Amanda. A time when I would have done anything for her. And now, she was just a stranger I had spent years of my life building a future with, only to have it all ripped away. I pulled into a random parking lot, resting my hands on the steering wheel. My reflection in the rearview mirror looked like someone I barely recognized. Tired eyes, unshaven face, like the past few days had aged me. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat, snapping me out of my thoughts. I glanced at the screen. "Mark." I answered. "Yeah. You still alive?" he asked, and I could hear the smirk in his voice. "Barely," I muttered. "You get it done?" "Yeah. Accounts closed. Everything's official." "Good," he said. "So what's next?" That was the $1 million question, wasn't it? I had spent so much time focused on getting away from Amanda that I hadn't stopped to think about what came after. Where did I go from here? What did I even want now? I sighed, rubbing my temple. "No idea." "Well," Mark said, "you could always do what every freshly dumped dude does. Hit the gym, get a terrible haircut, and start dating someone wildly inappropriate." I actually laughed at that, the first real laugh I'd had in days. "I'll pass on the bad haircut, but the gym might not be a bad idea." "See? That's the spirit," he said. Then his tone softened. "But seriously, man, you need to start thinking about you now. What do you want? What's gonna make you happy?" I didn't have an answer to that. "Not yet. I'll figure it out," I said. "Well, in the meantime, get your ass back here. I ordered pizza, and I'm not about to let you sit in a parking lot having a midlife crisis alone." I smirked. "It's not a midlife crisis." "It is absolutely a midlife crisis," Mark shot back. "Get back here before I eat your half." I rolled my eyes but started the engine. "Fine. Be there soon." I hung up and pulled out of the lot, heading back toward Mark's apartment. Maybe I didn't have everything figured out yet. Maybe I was still picking up the pieces of a life that had just shattered. But for the first time, I wasn't stuck in the past. For the first time, I was actually thinking about the future. When I got back to Mark's apartment, the smell of pizza hit me before I even stepped inside. He had already ripped open the box, a half-eaten slice hanging from his hand as he gestured toward the couch. "Figured you could use some comfort food," he said, talking around a mouthful of cheese. I wasn't really hungry, but I grabbed a slice anyway. Not because I needed food, but because normal things, eating, sitting on a couch, watching a random show in the background, made everything feel less like my life had just fallen apart. I sank into the couch, exhaling slowly. The weight in my chest had eased a little after leaving the bank, but there was still this lingering heaviness, like my body hadn't caught up to the fact that I was finally free. Mark glanced over at me, chewing. So, you done with her for good now? I swallowed a bite, staring at the TV. Some action movie was playing, but I hadn't been paying attention. Yeah, I said. I think I finally am. Mark nodded approvingly. Good. Now we just need to celebrate. I shot him a look. Celebrate what? My failed marriage? No, he said. You getting rid of dead weight. I snorted, shaking my head. Not really in a celebrating mood. He shrugged. Fine. No party. But you need to do something for yourself. Go out. Meet people. Be a normal human again instead of whatever mopey shell of a dude you've been lately. I rolled my eyes, but deep down, I knew he had a point. I had been in survival mode since the moment I caught Amanda in that hotel. My whole life had been about getting through the next hour, the next conversation, the next mess she left behind. Now that I didn't have to deal with her anymore, what did I even do? I'll think about it, I muttered. Mark smirked. That's code for, I'm not gonna do it. I huffed. Give me some time, man. It's only been a few days. Fine, fine, he said, waving me off. But soon you're going out. No excuses. I didn't argue, mostly because I was too damn tired to, but also because maybe he was right. Maybe it was time to start thinking about what came next. For the first time in a long time, my life was mine again, and I had no idea what I was going to do with it. The next few days passed in a weird haze. Without Amanda taking up space in my life, everything felt quiet. Not peaceful exactly, just empty. I hadn't realized how much of my daily routine had revolved around her until she wasn't in it anymore. No more waiting for her to come home late. No more strained conversations over dinner. No more trying to decode her moods, wondering if I had done something wrong or if she was just hiding something. Now it was just me, and I didn't know what to do with that. Mark had been giving me space, which I appreciated. He hadn't pushed me to go out or move on yet, though I knew it was coming. He was waiting, watching, probably trying to gauge when I'd be ready to snap out of this fog. I wasn't sure when that would be, but I knew one thing: I needed to stop drifting. So I made a list. Nothing major, just a few things to start pulling my life back together. Step 1. Get my own place. As much as I appreciated Mark letting me crash, I couldn't stay there forever. I needed my own space, somewhere that wasn't tainted by memories of Amanda. Step 2. Go back to the gym. Not because I wanted some revenge body or anything dramatic like that. I just needed something to keep me moving, to keep my brain from sinking into the same endless cycle of thoughts. Step 3. Socialize. I wasn't ready to date. Not even close, but I needed to start reconnecting with people. Friends I had lost touch with. Coworkers I barely talked to outside of work. Anyone who wasn't connected to Amanda. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was something. And right now, something was better than nothing. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I realized something else. For the first time since everything had fallen apart, I wasn't thinking about Amanda, and that felt like progress. A week after closing the joint account, I signed a lease for my own apartment. It wasn't anything fancy, just a small one-bedroom in a quiet part of town. But it was mine. No shared memories, no lingering ghosts of a failed marriage, just a fresh start. Moving in was easier than I expected. I didn't have much, just the essentials I had grabbed from the house, plus a few new things I picked up along the way. Mark helped me haul in a couch and a second-hand TV, cracking jokes the entire time about how depressing my setup was. "You need decorations, man," he said, tossing a throw pillow onto the couch. "This place looks like a serial killer lives here." I smirked. "I'll get to it." And I would. Eventually. For now, it was enough to have a space that was completely my own. A place where I didn't have to wonder who Amanda was texting, where she was sneaking off to, or what lie she'd come up with next. A place where I could breathe again. The next few weeks passed in a blur of small but important steps. I went back to the gym, just like I had promised myself. The first few sessions were rough. I had neglected it for too long. But with each workout I felt stronger, more in control. Like I was rebuilding myself from the ground up. I reconnected with friends, grabbed drinks with people I hadn't seen in years, laughed more than I had in months. And Amanda? She became a distant thought. I never reached out. She never did either. No last-minute apologies, no attempts to explain herself. It was like she had erased me from her life the second I walked out of that hotel room. And honestly, that was fine by me. One night, Mark and I were sitting on my balcony, beers in hand, watching the city lights. He nudged me with his elbow. "So, what's next?" I exhaled, staring out at the skyline. "I don't know." And for the first time, that answer didn't scare me. Because whatever came next, it was mine to decide. And that felt like freedom.